This right here is an American rye whiskey with an Irish twist. This week, let me tell you about the Townbranch rye whiskey. Welcome back to the channel, I'm Matt, I'm the Whiskey Nerd, and like I said, this week I'm looking at an American rye with a bit of an Irish connection. I'm looking at the Townbranch rye whiskey, and what do I mean when I say this is an American rye with an Irish twist? Well, first off, it is an American rye. It's from the Lexington Brewing and Distilling company in the town of Lexington, but it has an Irish connection because that kind of brewery, that distillery was founded, or at least refounded, rebuilt, re-established by an Irishman, a guy called Pearse Lyons, Dr. Pearse Lyons, actually. And he's an interesting character. He's sadly passed away a few years ago, but he was a very interesting character. He was a biochemist, he was a brewer, he was a distiller. He founded a company called Alltech, which is an interesting kind of company. It looks at yeasts, it looks at kind of the best way of doing whatever it is you're doing. So he founded breweries and he was making beer, really, really nice beer in a very unique way, very kind of innovative way. But also the company branched out into like animal feed and things like that, and like, oh, if we're making yeast, if we're playing with grains, what can we do to improve the animal feed? So it's a very kind of broad spectrum, but it's all with that kind of background of chemistry, background of like looking at the grains, looking at the actual science behind whatever it is you're doing. And he founded the Lexington Brewing Company, which then eventually became a distillery as well. It uses copper pot stills like they do here in Ireland. So it uses 2 copper pot stills, which is going to give a slightly different character to like a standard kind of column still. I'll put pictures of those 2 different types of stills there so you know what I'm talking about. And then eventually he came back to Ireland and he founded the Pearse Lyons Distillery here in Dublin in an old church. It's really cool. There'll be a picture of that up there as well. That's a really cool distillery, a really cool old kind of like old church they repurposed, that they've given new life, and it's a really, really interesting place. But let's go back over to the Lexington company. So this here was originally like a brewery, like I said, and what they did was they specialized in like barrel aged beers. So they were getting casks of like ex-bourbon casks, putting beers into those and experimenting, and they still do that, but then eventually they moved into making rye whiskey and making malt whiskey and making bourbon. In fact, they were the first people to make malt whiskey in the town of Lexington, I think, since prohibition. So again, bringing that kind of classic kind of malt whiskey back into circulation. And because they like using malt, this actually is a rye with a high malt content. So it is only, I think, 55% rye. I think it's 30% corn and 15% malted barley. So it is on the low end of rye. So for a rye, it has to be at least 51% of rye. Some distilleries go much higher than that. They went for 55, so it's towards the lower end of what you can have with rye and still call it a rye whiskey. And that 15% malted barley is going to give you that kind of rounded biscuity flavor you get from malt. It interestingly isn't a straight rye whiskey, so we don't have an age statement on it. We don't know how old it is. We don't know. It might be around 4 years old, but because it doesn't have straight on it, like I would imagine if you're gonna have a whiskey and you were gonna have it over 4 years old, you would put straight rye whiskey on it. So you could know it was 4 years old. So it might be slightly under, it might be like 3 years old, something around that kind of age statement. I know that they've recently redesigned the bottles to be like square. I'll put a picture of that up there. And I think they're increasing the age for those as well. So this here is a non-age statement version of that same rye whiskey. Comes in at 100 proof or 50% alcohol by volume. And I think that's kind of all there is to say about it. Like I said, it's distilled in 2 copper pot stills, so you're going to get that kind of a little bit of like peppery, almost like spicy note from the pot stills, which is going to complement, I think, well with the rye, in addition to the fact that it's got all that malted barley. So let's go in for the nose on the Townbranch rye. Okay, it is, I know I mentioned the malt in there, and malt is present, but it's definitely a rye whiskey. Like you get this spicy note, you get this like cinnamon, clove, anise, these kind of like nice spices, like baking spices, but like more on the sweet side. So I'd say it's almost like more candied. Like there's some vanilla in here because you're gonna have to use that that fresh American oak cask, which is going to give you a lot of those vanilla flavors. But there's vanilla, there's caramel, and for me, it's more on that candied. So instead of being like a loose, soft caramel, it's like that hard, kind of crystallized candy. So I'm actually getting like a bit of like crystallized ginger. So you know when you get that a ginger that's been like cooked with sugar, and you get this like slightly spicy kind of ginger note, but with a whole lot of sugar coming through, and that's kind of where I'm getting it here. There is a lot of like biscuity notes from the rye, and it reminds me a lot of like a gingerbread cookie. So if you know a gingerbread cookie, you get a lot of ginger in there, but you're also going to get those cloves, you're going to get that nutmeg, the cinnamon, the spices like that, and you're going to get those cooked grains. You're going to get that sugary, caramelized, biscuity, sugary cooked grain note. And it's definitely coming through here. There is like, for me, for rye whiskey, I always get this like herbal, almost menthol, eucalyptus, kind of black tea note, and definitely getting that here. Like it's maybe less on the menthol, kind of minty herbal side, and more on that eucalyptus, earthy, black tea, that kind of note coming through. There's a little bit of like toasted nuts almost, maybe like a walnut or something that's been like slightly toasted, and a fair bit of like orange citrus as well here on the nose. As I'm sitting with it, as I kind of concentrated the nose when I did this, I get, yeah, that kind of the orange oils you get on the peel of an orange, like that kind of note here on the nose. So I think that's enough on the nose. Let's go in for the palate. Cheers. Very, very sweet, but with a big hit of rye spice. Like as soon as it hit my palate, I got this big sugary sweet hit. I got that candied ginger, like I was saying earlier. I got that like caramelized, crystallized sugars. I got a little bit of like honey almost, because it almost felt a little thick. But then right behind that, I got this big hit of spice. Again, like those kind of gingerbread cookies, like you get those cooked grains, the cooked spices, that ginger, the cinnamon, the nutmeg, the clove, all those like spicy oaky notes you get from that reuse of the virgin oak come through into the palate. There was more of that kind of citrusy note, but where the nose, it was like orange, it was almost like lighter. Here on the palate, it was almost like heading towards like a grapefruit, or like those kind of like sharper citrusy notes. So I'm gonna go in again for another taste and see if I can find more of those like herbal, menthol, eucalyptus notes I was getting on the palate. Cheers. Yeah, I sat with it there for a minute, and definitely like up front, you get this big hit of spice, you get that big hit of sugar, but as you let it sit in your palate, as you let it like go across your tongue, into your cheeks, you get this like, again, less like that menthol note and more of like that black tea, like that black tea, the dried out, earthy, herbal kind of character coming through, as well as a good amount of that oak spice. Like as I'm talking now into the finish, like there's that tannic note you get from like oak barrels, but you get that oak spice coming through, where it is like those kind of baking spice notes, but it has its own unique kind of flavor that comes through. And again, more that honeyed character. Like for me, it is at 50% alcohol, 100 proof. It's not super low, it's not super high. It doesn't have a real burn, but it does have like a bit of weight behind it. It does have that bit of a presence in the glass and into the palate, where you get that kind of almost honeyed mouthfeel, which gives you this flavor coming through. So I'm gonna go in again, I'm gonna focus on the finish. Cheers. Okay, so on the finish, like up front, obviously, like I said, you get all that sweet hits, then it goes away from the sweetness and more into like the those earthy herbal notes, and that's what carries on into the finish. Like after a breath, you get actually a little bit of that, the menthol note, like the herbal note kind of moves a little bit back, but you still get that bit of black tea, the darker notes. It's just like slightly lighter than it was in the palate. You get that oak spice, you get that, like the sweetness is still there, like there is still sweetness, but it's as if I ate a sweet a little while ago as opposed to being sweet in the palate. It's like I can remember the sweetness, but that oak spice, the oak tannin, that kind of feeling in your cheeks with the oak spice, that's kind of what's lingering on into the finish. Before I give my final thoughts on the Townbranch rye whiskey, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews every week, and I put out cocktail recipes every Friday, and I will be putting out a cocktail recipe featuring this whiskey this Friday, so if you want to see that, make sure you hit subscribe, and make sure you let me know in the comments below what kind of whiskeys you want to see me review in the future. Are there any cocktail recipes you want to see me try out? Either way, let me know down below, because I'd love to hear from you. But now, as to my overall feeling on this whiskey, it's pretty solid. I think it's a solid little rye. I don't think it's the best rye I've ever had. Like, I'm relatively new to like the rye whiskey category. I think I think I like it. Like, I haven't tried the biggest amount. Like, I've tried the Barrel Seagrass, I've tried rye whiskies from Chicago, I've tried rye whiskies here from Ireland, I've tried the Townbranch now, I've tried a few different distilleries. I think it's a category I like because it's got a bit of spiciness, it's got a bit of a presence, and got a bit of character to it, and I like that. And this is a solid little rye. It's solid. I think I got this at the Pearse Lyons Distillery here in Dublin for like about €50, which for 100 proof alcohol, that's 50% alcohol by volume, I think that's a solid price. I think, you know, you're getting a rye, you're getting something a bit different, you're getting a fair bit of alcohol in it. I think that's a fair enough price. I don't think I'd be paying a huge amount, especially as it's not an age statement whiskey, because it doesn't have that age statement. I'm like, oh, it might be a bit on the younger side. Maybe if it had a bit more time in barrels, it would have a bit more kind of character to it. It would have been a bit deeper, but I think it's solid. I think it's a very nice little rye. I don't think I'll feel guilty using it in cocktails, but at the same time, I don't think I'm going to be like pouring it away or trying to use it up. It's one that I think I'm going to enjoy drinking it, but it wouldn't be my favorite rye in the world. So if you like rye whiskies, why not give it a try? If you're maybe trying out different ryes, there might be better ones to start off with than this one here. But like I said, it is a nice, solid little rye, so I am going to keep on enjoying it. And I'll see you next time. Sláinte.